I hope you'll indulge me and be a little patient as I begin my final annual address ever, anywhere, but certainly here. I want to begin with a confession. I did something sneaky and a bit mischievous. When I got here, the communion wine was rosé. I affectionately called it the anemic blood of Christ. And I had asked Ethel about it, and of course, the reason was it was easier to clean the linens, and okay. And I wasn't going to do anything more about it. And then Ethel went on vacation to California for 3 weeks. And I hopped in my car and I drove to Cappy's. And I bought the most expensive port wine I could find. And for the next 3 weeks, I demonstrated two things. Wine stains can be removed from linen, and port carries the joy of Jesus. A lot has changed in 12 years. And what I find astonishing is that while some of the changes were monumental, others seemingly inconsequential, like communion wine, the congregation took them all in stride. Not that everyone was always happy, but eventually most were won over. I'm going to talk about some of those changes in a moment, but first I want to lay out what I think are the reasons or the things that made these changes possible. And I think it involves three things. One is a pre-existing foundation of core values. And then on top of that, I brought communicating and demonstrating love and respect. And third, injecting playfulness into the work of ministry. So, foundational core values. When I got here, I initially arrived as a priest in charge. I also like to call that the rent-to-own program, where it was created so that clergy and congregations could sort of go for a test drive, kick the tires, see if this thing is going to work. And for the first year and a half or so, whatever it was, I didn't do anything other than listen and observe. And one day I sat down in my office and I asked myself, what do I see? And I came up with 4 things. I saw what I could only describe as pre-existing values that are over there on those banners. Passion for the gospel, a heart for the searching and the hurting, commitment to one another, and a willingness to do what it takes to follow Jesus as Lord. These are your core values. All I did was reveal them. They were already here. Now, I share them, of course. That didn't surprise me because, and I know from talking to the vestry soon after I arrived, that from the very first interview, we knew we were meant to be together. But I can't stress strongly enough that I didn't hand these things down from on high. I believed, and I still believe, they were already here. I built upon that foundation by being intentional about 2 things: communicating love and respect and injecting playfulness into this work of ministry. Where to start? The love and respect. One example in particular. So when I got here, our organist at the time was Brenda Caldwell. Fantastic, talented musician who was also plagued with health issues that occasionally would prevent her from being able to do her job. I learned that she had been fired by a previous rector, and although I don't agree with what happened, I could understand how a rector being put into a position of suddenly not having an organist might arrive at that place where they fire somebody. I don't agree with it, but I happen to be married to an organist. don't tell me there isn't a God. Okay, I'm serious, because we came together. God, of course, knew all about this. I didn't. And when it happened and Brenda couldn't show up, I picked the low-hanging fruit. Okay, honey? And she filled in. And what I did from that point on is I would go down to the choir room, and talk to them face to face about what was happening, what I knew about Brenda, what my goals were. My goals were for her health. My goals were for her to come back. Eventually, however, she did decide to retire. But I did everything I could and bent over backwards to try to say to the choir, I love Brenda, I love you, and we're going to get through this. I would say from time to time from the pulpit, I say that because I'm usually here, I love you. And I mean it. I can still remember the first time I said those words from the pulpit, and I thought, maybe I'm just reading into it, but I thought people's demeanor changed, as if no priest had ever said that before. We opened our home as much as we could to the congregation, but particularly to the vestry staff every Christmas, to the choir and the praise band and during the summer, to newcomers. We had several newcomer open houses back when we had an influx. Everything that we were trying to do seemed to be working, and we had a bunch of newcomers, and we had them over to our home. And then there were other things like just being with you socially. After vestry meetings, sometimes, some of you can remember, we would go to Distare's, right? The martini bar that's not there anymore on Main Street, after a vestry meeting, and just be together. And playfulness. Bum, 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 ba-bum, bum, ba-bum. That was very deliberate on my part. I can still remember the first time I showed up as Darth Vader. I didn't know how you all were going to like, maybe it was sacrilegious. I don't know how you were going to react. And you reacted very well. That was a deliberate attempt to inject playfulness into the work of ministry. My self-perception is I don't take myself too seriously. I mean, think about the number of times in church on a Sunday morning the congregation has erupted in laughter because Carolyn and I are bantering about, we love each other to death, and we also annoy each other to death. Okay, and you get to be observers in this thing, right? And you've all broken out in laughter, and that's part of the playfulness of, I want liturgy to be excellent, but I do not believe that excellent liturgy means somberness and solemnness all the time. I would say to people who made mistakes in liturgy, and I gather that there were some previous rectors who would lay into people for making a mistake. And the first few times that someone made a mistake and they would say to me, "Oh, I'm so sorry," they would fall over themselves saying, "I'm sorry." And I'd say, look, in liturgy, you got to live by one thing. If you sin boldly and keep going. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. You and I know, but nobody else knows. Don't worry about it. All of these things, I think, made it possible over time to introduce change. And I'm not going to go into every single change in detail. I'm going to tick off a few. Some of these changes were instituted by me. Some of them were collaborative. Some of them by Carolyn. And just by bullet point, the sound system, and later the video system, the bulletin, children worshiping with parents, a paid nursery staff, new vestments, these green vestments that I'm wearing, and there are a new set of Lenten vestments that the colors are generally referred to as a Lenten array. They were donated by Joan Thomas in memory of GB. And they were designed and assembled by Pauline Roy. Now, to these, I want to highlight 3 more changes in detail. 2 of them were organic, and these are important because they didn't come from me, but I think they are the result of the kind of environment and culture that I was trying to create. And the first is the band pit. Now, those pews over here at the baptismal font, imagine those over there on both sides. And in front is a grand piano. There's no room for a praise band. Carolyn wanted to involve as many people as she could in the praise band. David Folding played the drums. We got George on the guitar. We had Lynn playing tuba eventually. Where are we going to put all these people? And a particular parishioner apparently overheard this and said, I'll take them out. And they were out. And I am pretty sure he regretted it as he was taking them out, because whoever put them in meant for them to stay forever. Big, huge rods in the wall. And when they were gone, I can remember a parishioner coming up to me, anger in his face, "What happened to the pews?" Expecting me to say it was my idea. And I said, well, Fader took them out. Well, I'm not backing over him. His response was, oh. And word to the wise, when you're searching for a new priest, try to figure out if they understand how power and authority work in a church, because it matters a lot. Because there's canon law, okay, that no one gives 2 hoots about unless there's a problem. Canon law says that the rector has full control and use of the building and everything in it. So what? So what? I mean, I refer to power as like, if I have a chainsaw, I have the power to go cut down a tree out in the lawn. I'm going to find out real fast if I had the authority to cut it down. There is formal power and authority, and there is informal power and authority. And it's the informal stuff that you have to pay attention to. And there are people in every congregation, sometimes they're called matriarchs and patriarchs. It doesn't matter what you call them. But no one picks them. It's not like there's an election, and no one just decides, oh, I'm going to be the matriarch or patriarch. That's not the way it works. It's totally organic. And you know that it's happened when someone does something and the rest of the congregation goes, oh, okay. No vestry meetings, no voting, no polling of the congregation. The pews just came out. Now, those cutouts for wheelchairs, my understanding is that those were cut out in the 80s. There was a proverbial holy war after it. And so within that context, all of these pews came out because one person decided, and that person doesn't even come to the 1017 and listen to the band. I can only conclude that he did it because he loved what was going on in the church, and he just decided to do it. Another organic example is the freestanding altar. I can remember when I arrived, not long after I arrived, someone more or less said, you're not going to change anything at the 8 o'clock service, are you? And I said, no. I have no intention of changing anything at the 8. And I meant it. Now, there was a time, many of you don't remember this time, when this would come and go. Usually it was gone. It would be hauled away and put in the corner back over there. It would be brought out on those Sundays when it was used, and then it would be taken away. And there was it had sort of a second-class citizen status, as in my words. I mean, when you look at this place, I mean, look how small it is, and look at the space that we have. The first day I arrived, I took one look at this platform, and I said, oh, that's the result of a compromise. Because this platform needs to be 3 feet farther out, at least, in order to accommodate an altar and all the things that we would normally do up here. We just work around it. I got these candles because I thought it was important to give this altar some dignity. And that's the extent of it. It just kept coming and going and coming and going. And then one day, Ethel asked me if we could leave the freestanding altar. Now, I'm all in favor of that, of course. But it wasn't my decision. I looked at her and I said, well, Ethel, if that's what you want. And here's what happened. Prior to that, at the 8 o'clock service, the elderly people who had mobility issues, I went out to them because they couldn't make it to the high altar. As soon as we started having Eucharist at the freestanding altar down here, they all came up. Now, I don't know about you, but as far as I'm concerned, that was a watershed moment when no one had anticipated that that might be the result of having the freestanding altar in place, and it's been there ever since. But it wasn't my idea. But there was one decision that I made, one change that I attempted to make that was very intentional. And it was the full inclusion of LGBTQ plus people. When I arrived, I was asked, will you bless same-sex unions? And I said no. And I, at that time, was not in favor of doing that. What I didn't tell anybody was that I had been wrestling with the issue for at least 15 years. And I was still wrestling with it and increasingly ambivalent about my position. But my position was my position. And then a parishioner came to see me. I'll never forget it. We're in my office. He's sitting down. I'm looking right at him, and he tells me that one of his sons has come out. And he asked me, what should I do? And I looked at him and I said, you love your child. Love your son. Now, after he left, I went down, I sat at my desk, and I thought a couple of things. I had a lot of thoughts, but one of them was, well, if a child is coming out to his father, his parents, it's just a matter of time before someone knocks on my door and wants to get married. And that is not the time to start talking about these issues. So I thought, we got to talk about it. But then the other thing I said to myself is, defend your position, Ben. I challenged myself to defend it. I just couldn't anymore. All of the things that I used to think were important, for academic reasons and biblical reasons, I was in complete disagreement with the traditional arguments that excluded the LGBTQ plus people. So I went about doing two things. The first is, first of all, I made no pronouncements from here. My approach was to work with the leadership and to talk about it in Christian education on Sunday morning in the Bennett room. And I knew that word would get out. And that's the way it would get out to the congregation, which is a much better way than to stand up and make pronouncements. The vestry and I did a book study on Using God and the Gay Christian by Matthew Vine. And at the end of that book study, I think we were in the chapel. I'm looking at Paula. Weren't we in the chapel when we talked? Yeah, well, it doesn't really matter where we were. I told everyone, you can't be silent. Everyone has to speak up about where we are in this study. And we weren't all in agreement. But one by one, everyone in the vestry said, well, Ben, it's your decision. Well, I then said, okay, But, and I didn't use this phrase, but what I meant was, and if a holy war breaks out, I don't want to hear that you have second thoughts. I mean it. If something happens and the congregation gets an uproar, every last one of you are going to stand behind me and say, we support our rector, and we told him he could make this decision. And they all said, yep, okay. And that was pretty much it. Now, Carolyn has a better memory than I do of timing, but it seemed like the next week, gays and lesbians started showing up. And nothing was said. They just came. And they are a full part of the life of the congregation. I have never been asked to do a wedding. I would have if I had been asked. That didn't happen. But gays and lesbians are involved in every aspect of the life of the church, including the vestry. And I'm very, very proud of that. The thing is that, again, whether the changes are monumental or seemingly inconsequential, an unhealthy church can't deal with them, even the inconsequential stuff. A couple of parishioners have left over inconsequential stuff, and I mean literally, I can think of two. But there wasn't a holy war. Nothing broke out. When I say inconsequential, someone left because I made changes to the way the linens were cleaned. But people who are internally angry and have other issues have a very difficult time dealing with these kinds of things. But overall, the parish was so healthy, it was like they had antibodies that worked against that kind of viral infection that can happen in congregations that are full of conflict and are unhealthy. But this has not been that kind of place. And while all of this was going on, I launched programmatic efforts to try to rally people around common tasks and to put Christ Church squarely in the consciousness of the surrounding communities. It was my idea to start the first ever Pops concert. I mean, after all, we live close to Boston. So let's have a Pops concert. The music here is ingrained. The music tradition here is ingrained. It's always been excellent. How do we get people to come to our church? Because no one cares about Evensong. I'm sorry, you might care, but no one else cares. No one. No one cares about Compline. That's not going to bring them to church. But if you have a John Williams concert, well, that might bring them to church. At least in that moment, and they see who we are, and they see our choir at work. They meet us. I instituted a family movie night. We even got a popcorn machine, and we would meet in the Bennett room, and my hope was that the kids and their families would come, and the kids would invite their friends, and their friends would bring their parents, and people would start coming that way. And some did. I started Honor Our Heroes. That wasn't really geared so much to people in the community as much as it was to our own community. In the back of my mind was, you've got your C and Ears, right? You've got your Easter lilies and your Christmas poinsettias who come to church on those days. Maybe there's one other day that we can get them here. So let's do Honor Our Heroes. I would talk about creating a virtual glass door. Every public building that you can think of has glass doors. Every single one of them. The library, the courthouse, Market Basket, Hannaford's, Walmart. Every public building has glass doors. That's very deliberate. That's like Architecture 101. But churches have solid wooden doors. If you are a member of the church, you don't think twice about it. But if you are not churched, everything about it says go away. So how do you create a glass door? And by the way, we have glass doors now in Hartwell, and it never occurred to me that this church has historical building status. And I got a letter from the Fitchburg Historical Society. It was kind of a shot across the bow. I'm like, oops. Be that as it may, how do you create a virtual glass door? Well, I created a Facebook page. I got us on YouTube. We recorded sermons. We recorded the Adult Sunday School. We recorded anthems, and we put them up on the internet. I had talked about getting a video system way back when. That didn't go very far, and sadly, it took a pandemic for us to realize the value of having one. Trick or treat on Main Street, I think, is the single biggest thing that we would do every year. I got us involved in that with Fitchburg, and we became ground zero for that event every year. I'm not making this up. Thousands of people came through our doors on that one day over the course of 4 hours. Guildhall had stations, had game stations for kids. They could just go around and play games and work off some energy. The parents could have something to drink, and of course we gave away candy. And you could get your picture taken with Darth Vader. Yours truly just sweated underneath all that vinyl and stood in front of a green screen. And later, about 2 weeks, it took me 2 weeks after that to put in like a spaceship background, and then I'd put it all up on some, public drive, and people could take it down and download it themselves for free. Carolyn started a music camp in the summer with Ginny Chilton and later with Robert. Some of the most endearing photographs to me are from the music camp. Kids came, brought their friends, and people came to Christ Church because of the music camp. Now, I have to point out that Robert, when he came in 2015, he brought his own vision to this goal of exposing Christ Church to the community. And of course, I don't need to tick off all the events, right? All the special music that he's done, music events, the Evensongs, Compline, John Williams concert, and incorporating professional musicians and kind of raising the bar for the music that we do here, having brass and harp and violin. And he created a solid relationship with Fitchburg State University, something that I tried to do and failed. And through the Choral Scholar Program and by developing a relationship with the director of the choral group at Fitchburg, he's had events where we've combined the two for one big concert. Now, I think we've done that, twice? Yeah, twice. I've not been focusing on chronology, but somewhere around this time, actually back when Ginny Chilton came to be our organist and replaced Brenda, I think the vestries at the time felt that all of the pistons were firing at Christ Church. We had outstanding and talented staff leading outstanding programs and equally talented and supported staff assisting us. And they were adding incredible value to the work and ministry of Christ Church. Now, you're going to hear about some big changes at the annual meeting. The parish administrator position is being cut in half to 20 hours. The family ministry position is being eliminated. But I want to tell you a little bit about Rhonda and what she's done in addition to her formal duties. Before the pandemic, her office was the proverbial water cooler, where parishioners would just camp out and talk and complain and otherwise interrupt her for hours on end. And somehow she got her work done. She's a diplomat. She's a diplomat to all kinds of parishioners who call her for all kinds of reasons. Every Christmas and every Easter, we have this amazing bulletin, and it's been my goal. It's like the holy grail of goals. We're going to have a perfect bulletin someday with no typos. That's never happened. And every Christmas and every Easter, somebody's name was spelled wrong. And Rhonda had to deal with the calls. And demanding people who wanted certain things done a certain way. And I'm thinking now about funerals. in particular when people who rarely, if ever, came to church wanted certain things done for their loved one at the funeral that were theologically and liturgically inappropriate. And she was the diplomat. And in general, just helping people who were angry, lonely, depressed, she would listen to them without complaint. She even functioned as a pastor, reaching out to our shut-ins just to check up on them. That was especially true during the pandemic. I've been blessed with Paula Gattel, our volunteer staff member for communications. If you've seen any of the videos from Honor Our Heroes or the annual year in review, which you'll see, you've just seen a tip of her creativity. You know, some people want to do graphics and advertising, the kind of stuff that Paula does, but they don't have the talent. They think they do, but they don't. And other people have the talent, but they don't have the time. Paula has the talent, and she's given her time these 12 years. Facebook page, the YouTube page, newsletters, the emails that you get, all that graphic stuff is the work of Paula. She gave a measure of professionalism to our publications that normally churches want to have but can't have. All the pistons are firing. We had strong leadership, vibrant worship, consistently joyous with high energy. Kids were present. Kids would run up into the chancel to hug mom and dad during the passing of the peace. And that may not sound like a big deal to you, but it's a really big deal because that's the Holy of Holies. You don't go up there. But I wanted the kids to go up there. I wanted them to feel like they owned the place. And apparently they did. And they still do. By any spiritual metric, we were doing something right. There are two things that I wish I could. Actually, I think I'm going to be able to show you when you start lunch. I'm going to show you a photograph and a video. And the photograph, just to set it up, is a photograph of Carolyn and the choir at the end of Carolyn's time as the interim organist after Brenda retired and before Ginny Chilton came on board. And Carolyn's laying down in front of the chancel with this red sweater, and she's got her head on one arm, and the choir is surrounding her with these goofy looks, some of them in seductive poses. Safe church. How not to do safe church. I mean, you look at the faces and you say, how do you make this stuff up? Right? Churches that are angry and conflicted and upset with each other, they don't do that kind of stuff. And you're going to see a 1 minute and 30-second promo video that we did several years ago. And the content of the promo video isn't important for my purposes. I want you to look at people's faces. And you tell me that they're not having fun. I don't regret a single thing. Not one single thing. But sadly, the efforts didn't produce the growth that was needed to keep up with attrition, let alone surpass it. I tried to do an accounting of people who have left Christ Church over the past 12 years. It's around 112. Almost half are from deaths, graduation, and no longer being able to make it to church. The rest are just sporadic reasons that you really can't pinpoint one thing and say, oh, if we change that, people would stay. It's more complicated than that. That's about 10 people a year. And we just weren't keeping pace with that kind of attrition. Personally, I have to say that the last 2 years have been difficult. You know, I'm 63, Carolyn is 73, and in 2020, she had 2 strokes. And there's been this sense of age catching up with us. Initially, we thought I would stay till I'm 65. But this nagging sense of age bearing down on us just grew stronger and stronger, and finally, in this past November, I decided it's time to retire. And I wanted you to know that that's why I'm retiring. I'm proud of the work that we accomplished. Even if the results didn't bear the kind of fruit that we had hoped, I don't regret anything. There's nothing I would do differently. Nothing. And just by the way, this is not goodbye. We've got 4 more months. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of challenging work to be done in the coming months. Remember, when you're feeling down and the future's uncertain, and you're feeling like you're stuck in Good Friday, remember your liturgy. Remember what you go through year after year after year. There is a third day, a new day. Even if you can't see it, it's coming. Remember that our God is a God of resurrection. You are resurrection people. And remember your values and live by them. Carolyn and I love you dearly. I hate it when this happens. We feel nothing but gratitude for the privilege of serving you for 12 years. God bless you.